Close your eyes with me and imagine we're at the beach. The breeze cools our cheeks, the salt permeates the air, the crashing waves soothe our racing minds. Wish you were there? Well, so do our sponsors, Shearwater Inn in Lincoln City. They'd love for you to come stay in one of their rooms just steps from the beach. Enjoy the hot tub or free continental breakfast delivered to your room. And I don't know about you, but I love a good stormy day at the ocean. It's beach season all year long at shearwaterinn.com.
OPB Podcasts.
You may recognize this popular dark fantasy animated film.
Want to hear my new song?
My father can't play piano.
This piano plays me.
Making up a song about Coraline.
Or perhaps this one.
Who are you?
My name is Pinocchio. I'm your son!
You're not my son! Don't come near me!
The boy's telling the truth, Master Geppetto.
It's full of cockroaches!
Or maybe this animated commercial from the 80s.
Come on, guys. Let's harmonize.
I've been hearing it on the radio!
Rudy, you did it!
Well, hey, sure. I mean, love you guys.
That was Coraline, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, and Will Vinton Studios' California Raisins ad from 1986. And all three came out of Oregon, the hotspot for animation magic.
In the animation world, this is considered a mecca for animation.
Animation in Oregon is really huge. It's actually pretty absurd, the amount of talent that is located here in this state.
There's still a real strong ethic here of we're going to do stop motion and we're going to make rats for Portlandia, or we can do animation in all these different ways because we're Portland.
From the Gert Boyle Studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Today, we're bringing you the story of how Oregon became an animation powerhouse and helped build the art form's legacy. OPB's Oregon Art Beat producer Eric Slade helped make a documentary about Oregon's animation scene, and he's here with us to break it all down. Eric, thank you so much for being here on The Evergreen with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jen.
So, Eric, give us a sense of the animation scene here in Oregon. How big is it?
It's pretty big. I mean, you got to start with Leica because they're the biggest, one of the top 10 animation studios in the country. They employ hundreds of people at their studio in Hillsboro, and every film they've turned out has been Oscar nominated.
Oh, really?
Yeah, every one of them. They haven't won an Oscar yet, but everyone gets nominated. And they're always working on a new film, and they're big budget, like $50 to $60 million range. So they're a big deal. Right now, in fact, they're working on Wildwood, which is based on the Colin Meloy book.
Oh, and Colin Meloy, he's the lead singer of the Decemberists?
That's the one.
Yeah, cool.
And then over in Northwest Portland, there's Shadow Machine, opened in 2015. They actually have a branch in Hollywood that's been going for a long time, and then they moved up here in 2015 because they're getting so big. People have probably heard of them because of Pinocchio, which won the Oscar last year.
And the Oscar goes to Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
I want to thank Shadow Machine and the crew up in Portland.
Animation is cinema. Animation is not a genre.
But they also make a lot of animated TV shows like BoJack Horseman, which is big, Robot Chicken, another really big series. Just this year, they came out with In the Know, which is sort of a satire of an NPR radio show.
I'm Lauren Caspian, and this is In the Know. This is In the Know. You're a f***ing god.
Oh, yes, we've heard of that one.
We would have heard of that, right, Jen?
Yes.
Over in Northeast Portland, there's House Special, which is famous for animating the Mr. Peanut character from the Planters Peanuts ads.
At Planters, we put fresh roasted flavor into every can. which has its drawbacks. Guys, know anything about this missing inventory? Wasn't me. The cheeks don't lie, chat. Irresistibly planters.
But they do a lot of really inventive commercial work. They're a pretty big-time studio, and everybody who works there puts out their own animated short films, too, which is kind of the Portland thing. You know, everyone's working on commercial work, but they're also working on their own creative work, too. And then there's Refuge VFX, which is a visual effects studio. They do work for TV, feature films, lots of big-name films and TV shows you would know. In fact, they just won an Emmy for their work on the FX series Shogun.
Life and death are the same. Both can have value and purpose.
And there are many, many more, but those are kind of the big ones.
Yeah, okay, so we have some serious presence in terms of the studios putting out animation work. And, you know, because of that, we have some of the best animators in the world right here in Oregon. Can you name some of the most popular animations that have been made here?
Well, I mean, we heard some of them off the top there. Coraline is still probably my favorite film that Leica has put out. It came out in 2009. Probably the most celebrated film that they've made. But the Box Trolls was great, too. It came out in 2014.
Box Trolls? Box Trolls are monsters.
At least, that's what everyone's been told.
I mean, I've enjoyed all of their films. The animation, the art direction are just so amazing and entertaining. In fact, in 2018, the Portland Art Museum had a big show with all the props and sets and characters from a bunch of Leica films. And I swear I could have spent days there looking at each one of the little pieces that goes into those films. And then Pinocchio, I mean, spectacular. Won the Oscar last year for Best Animated Feature. And, you know, one of the best things that's come out of Portland for sure.
And for your job at OPB, you have been surrounded by animators in Oregon. And many of the Oregon-made films we've been talking about so far, like the ones coming out of Leica, are made using stop-motion animation. Okay, so can you briefly explain this, how stop-motion animation works? And, you know, you mentioned seeing that museum exhibit. What do the puppets look like in person?
Yeah, it is an amazing process to watch. I mean, it's very much like the production of a live-action film. There are art directors, costume designers, set decorators, except they just do everything in miniature. So everything you see on screen in a stop-motion film is handmade by artists. There's a cupboard. Somebody made that by hand, little teeny pieces. And actually shooting the film involves making these tiny little movements of the characters and the props, shooting a frame of film, moving the characters and props a tiny bit more, shooting another frame of film, and you do that over and over and over again. In the case of a feature film like Leica puts out, it takes them years to create a film because it's such a small process. And in fact, when we were making this documentary for Artbeat, we got to tour Leica and see the sets and props that they'd been working on.
This is the cemetery set that Kubo spends quite a bit of time in.
What you see is a warehouse that's full of hallways with all these individual little stages, and there's one animator in each one of them, and they're working on a scene, and step by step, piece by piece, but there are dozens and dozens of these filling the warehouse, all working together to make the film.
Okay, so they're working on them like a bunch of different scenes or little parts at once because of just how long it takes.
There might even be 5 people working on the same scene, just a different piece of it. So, and one of the most amazing things at Leica that they showed us is that the characters that they create are all 3D printed. And that means they can make teeny little pieces of each part of the face. So if they need the mouth to move, they go into a little box, they take out a mouth that's in the position they want it, they take off the current mouth, put the new one on, shoot the frame, do that again over and over. So there's a whole crew that just tracks all the pieces of all the faces of all the characters in the films going on at Leica.
Okay, we have this big animation scene here. It has grown brighter by the decade. But it all kind of got started with Will Vinton and Bob Gardner, who both won an Oscar in 1975.
And the nominees are Closed Mondays, Will Vinton and Bob Gardner, producers.
I was so honored to be nominated for a film that, we really was a kind of a first, and it was kind of a little bit of a breakout. And the Academy had never had a stop-motion film prior to that was nominated.
And the winner is? The winner is Closed Mondays, Will Vinton and Bob Gardner.
It was an amazing experience, remarkable. I mean, I was shocked. Those were hairier days, and I remember saying something like, all I could think of was,
hello, and thank you to all our friends back home in Oregon.
Oregon shout out. That was Will Vinton recalling that night back in 1975. Eric, can you tell us about this Oscar-winning moment? What was so special about this, about the film that won?
Well, the film that won, Closed Mondays, is this wildly creative, unleashed film about a guy who stumbles into an art museum and suddenly all of the art in the museum starts coming to life. So there's virtually no dialogue, but there's wildly creative images going on all around him. It was a big deal for Will Vinton winning, partly because it was an Oregonian winning, which hadn't happened to many Oregonians to that point. That was a big deal. But it's also a big deal because it was stop motion, as Will said before, which wasn't really happening in those days. Stop motion was kind of considered old-fashioned and pretty much dead when Vinton and Gardner made that film. So at the time, everything was being done with traditional cell animation, like Bugs Bunny, where they paint each cell individually. So it was a groundbreaking event in a lot of different ways.
And what happens after this big win for Will Vinton and not just him, but the animation industry in Oregon more broadly?
Well, as Will told me when we had a chance to sit down and talk, that with an Oscar in his hand at that moment, suddenly all these people were willing to talk to him who never would talk to him before. Of
course.
Right? So he was able to get a whole bunch of projects off the ground. And he started getting lots of clients, producing short films and commercials, TV shows. He was able to hire a ton of people. Eventually, there were hundreds of people working at the Will Vinton Studios in Northwest Portland. It, in fact, was the largest studio in Oregon at the time. His biggest hit that everyone's heard of pretty much was the California Raisins. It was an ad campaign for the California Raisin Board. And that's what really put Will Vinton Studios on the map. It was a series of commercials. Started out with one simple commercial, but it was such a hit. I mean, it was overnight success. It led to primetime half-hour TV specials about the raisins. There were books. They even put out some albums. Even at one point, Michael Jackson called up Will Vinton and said, I want to be a raisin. And Michael Jackson ends up being one of the California raisins. So it was a big deal. It was also Vinton Studios that developed the M&M's campaign. They're the ones who turned the M&M's into animated characters, and it's still going today. In fact,
really?
Yeah, they say it's the longest running ad campaign in the history of ads. I think it's also important to note that it was Will Vinton who came up with the term claymation, which is sort of a household word these days, but he's the one who invented it. There is a really great documentary called Clay Dream that came out a couple years ago where they tell the whole entire Will Vinton story.
Okay, I am intrigued. I'm definitely going to have to check that one out. Okay, so Will Vinton, he creates his own studio, employs hundreds of people, and then builds the largest film studio Oregon has ever seen. That's huge. And Eric, you got to speak with Vinton a year before he died in 2018. How will you remember his legacy in Oregon?
It was great when we got a chance to talk. He was in a place of kind of looking back at the work he'd been doing, and he'd been through a lot at that point. It was really great to hear him reflect on his work.
I'm really proud of the fact that we really helped to usher in 3D animation to the world, and really importantly, to adult appeal for animation. I'm also really proud of what we built here in the region. We pulled in wherever we could, artists from the local community to fill the ranks of the company. A lot of them were probably practically unhireable in some places, but great artists, that we nurtured and supported. And so I'm really proud of that because we built such a great creative company for a very long time.
Coming up after a break, other artists who made Oregon a hotspot for animation. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you dig what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we will bring a little joy to your Monday morning with a new episode each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo to stay up to date on everything we and our colleagues are up to. And remember, this episode about Oregon's animation magic, all of Eric Slade's great videos for Oregon Artbeat, and all the reporting and storytelling you get from OPB every day are made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. Support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to the episode. So I want to be sure to highlight that it wasn't just Will Vinton making strides for Oregon animation. There were other independent animators working in the state. Can you tell me more about their work and what they did for animation?
Sure, and there's a lot of them, so we probably don't have time to talk about everybody, but one of the people we should mention is Jim Blashfield. He's still making amazing work. He's a super creative animator, probably most famous for the groundbreaking music videos he did back in the day for bands like the Talking Heads, Paul Simon, Joni Mitchell. The Joni Mitchell video, by the way, was shot in the apartment building I was living in Northwest Portland at the time.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that is... You should brag about that.
I know.
For the rest of your life.
And, his animation was all made with this really interesting animated collage technique where he'd cut out and move around pieces of paper, but, multiple layers that went on forever. Really beautiful. Joanna Priestley, she's made dozens of animated films, starting back in 1983 with this great short called The Rubber Stamp Film, which uses rubber stamped images and drawings on paper that are all animated. Super fun, and her work is amazing. And then there's Rose Bond, who's really known for animated installations, really beautiful work. When we were filming our special, she was creating an animated installation for the Oregon Symphony that was projected all over the proscenium of the theater in time with the music, and I had never seen anything like that before in my life. And of course, then there's Joan Gratz.
I initially had a background in painting, and then I went to architecture school, which was such a long program that I started doing more painting. And then I started taking photographs of the paintings or shooting them on film. And then at a certain point realized I was actually animating.
So what else can you tell us about Joan Gratz?
She developed this amazing style of animation where she would basically paint with clay. And you actually see it in a bunch of the Will Vinton films, too. She was working for Will Vinton Studios at the time, and I think she'd actually brought this technique to Will Vinton Studios. She won the Oscar in 1992 for a really beautiful film called Mona Lisa Descending a Staircase that's done in that really inventive clay painting style.
And the Oscar goes to Mona Lisa Descending a Staircase, Joan C. Gratz.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So another animator to highlight as well is Gerald Howard.
I was always kind of fascinated with film and photography, and then later on animation sort of took hold, and it was kind of pivotal for me when I figured out that animation wasn't just something you consumed, it was something that you can make.
Like many others, Howard got his start at Will Vinton Studios.
I was there for 2.5 years, and it was like graduate school for me. I remember being so excited and wide-eyed. I was like, this whole building is about making cartoons.
So, Eric, tell me about the work he's done.
He's done so much. He worked on the Wallace and Gromit animated pieces over in England. He is very sought after because he's so good, and he does a lot of commercial work. But of course, he makes his own work too, like a lot of animation artists in town. During COVID, he made this beautiful piece called Quarantine Cat.
Worst week of the pandemic so far is this new coronavirus.
About a cat dealing with the pandemic by eating a lot of snack foods, like a lot of us did.
Yes, haven't we all dealt with the pandemic that way? Continue.
He has a really beautiful film called See the Truth that addresses the subject of prejudice and perception and how bias can be passed down through generations in a family. When we were filming, he was making this piece about the Paul Bunyan statue in the Kenton neighborhood. It comes to life and starts walking through town. And he's still working on that, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I can't wait to see it. Unfortunately, the animation industry isn't all sunshine. Recently, there's been tons of layoffs, especially at big studios like Pixar. They laid off about 14% of their staff just in May of 2024. We recently caught up with Gerald Howard to ask him how he's doing at the moment.
I'm not working on any animation at the time. My side hustle is I have a rental property, and I've been working on getting that habitable. And so it's been like a few months break from animation, but the impression that I'm getting is that the industry on the whole is really kind of slowed down, which is really strange because just a couple of years ago, there was, all these big projects. There was, it's always like feast or famine.
We asked him how he's feeling about the state of the industry right now.
The industry is kind of making changes, anticipating this big impact from AI that isn't really happening right now. I think execs are thinking AI is going to be this magical thing where you just put in some prompts and you get out a finished, polished product. I think they're kind of waiting for it to get to that point, or hoping that it's going to get to that point really soon to where it can replace people. I'm not a big studio, and I don't work for a big studio. And I'm just trying to be like just a small, nimble, independent animator. I don't know how it's going to affect me, but I'm trying to not make decisions based on when that impact hasn't happened yet.
Eric, I want to ask you one more question. You have spent all this time studying, looking into the animation scene here in Oregon. What do you think listeners need to know about Oregon's animation magic and why it matters in the field of animation and, in the field of filmmaking as a whole?
I think our animation scene is a great example of Portland and Oregon at our best. We're faced with rising rents and, we're faced with some big existential problems here, but we're still a place where people come to do creative work, to try new things, and to collaborate with other creative people. And that's different. That's really different here. Everyone says in LA it's competitive, and people come here and notice the difference. And I think the fact that animation artists are still moving here, that animation companies are opening new studios here, that's a great sign that creative spirit is still really alive here.
Yeah, that's a really exciting place for us to be. Thank you so, so much for sharing with us and talking with us today, Eric.
Thank you, Jen.
You can find a link to Oregon Art Beat's documentary, Oregon's Animation Magic, in the show notes. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Mia Estrada produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. He also engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Julie Sabatier and Sage Van Wing. Eric Slade, Jewel Gilfillan, Katrina Sarson, and Mia Estrada did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.